Preface. Uruk, located in southern Mesopotamia, is considered the world's first great city and a symbol of the birth of civilization. Renowned for its cultural, economic, and technological achievements, this legendary city is credited with fundamental revolutions in human history, such as the development of cuneiform writing and the emergence of monumental architecture. Uruk was not only a political center, but also a religious, economic, and artistic bastion of the ancient world. Located on the banks of the Euphrates River, in a region with extremely fertile soil, the city became an important agricultural center. Its strategic position facilitated the development of an extensive trade network, which connected Uruk with other settlements in Mesopotamia, the Persian Gulf, and even with regions in the eastern and northwestern Middle East. The advanced irrigation network allowed the inhabitants to control the flow of water from the Euphrates, thus supporting agriculture. The main crops included wheat, barley, dates, and various vegetables. Agricultural success generated food surpluses, which supported population growth and economic development. Uruk became a major trading hub, facilitating the exchange of goods such as metals, wood, semi-precious stones, and textiles. Trade was carried out both by land caravans and by boats sailing the Euphrates and Tigris rivers. The city was also renowned for its impressive buildings, which reflected both the religious power and the social organization of the community. The most emblematic structures in Uruk were the temples dedicated to the goddess Inanna, the goddess of love, fertility, and war, and the god Anu, the god of the sky. The White Temple of Anu, built on an artificial hill, and the complex dedicated to Inanna were focal points of the city, decorated with elaborate mosaics and murals. Chapter 1. The Shadow of the Sun over Uruk. At dawn on a hot day, the city of Uruk shone under the golden light of the Mesopotamian sun. Beyond the slender stone gates, covered with mosaics and sacred symbols, the streets were bustling with life. Date sellers placed their wares in woven baskets, stone cutters chiseled statues of the gods, and the sound of sacred drums echoed from the temple of Inanna, the goddess of love and war, at the edge of the sacred quarter. On a high point in the city sat the royal palace, a citadel of burnt clay and stone, surrounded by gardens with palm trees, irrigation canals, and peacocks that roamed freely. The palace walls were thick and decorated with brightly colored frescoes, depicting scenes from the epic of King Gilgamesh and ritual dances under the full moon. Inside, the coolness was maintained by the floors. The corridors were wide and covered with hand-woven rugs of wool and linen, and the scent of incense and myrrh hung discreetly in the air. On the walls, mosaics of lapis lazuli and turquoise formed mythical scenes, and statues of the goddess Inanna watched from carved niches. King Enshugul, a tall and vigorous man with long hair and gold rings and a carefully braided beard, sat on his black stone throne. His eyes were like the shadow of night, deep and patient, but in them flickered an unsettling light, a premonition of change. Wearing a purple robe embroidered with solar symbols, Enshugul was more than a ruler. He was considered an intermediary between gods and men. Next to him sat Queen Ninsera, known for her wisdom and gentleness. Her black hair was fastened with jade needles, and her golden-yellow silk dress enveloped her body in an aura of light. She had delicate hands, with long fingers, used to touching papyri and reading the stars, and in her hands the kingdom found its balance, between the fire of the gods and the voice of the people. The palace groaned with life. Among the servants and scribes, 2 children ran around laughing. Prince Lugal, 10 years old, passionate about stories about the glorious battle of Gilgamesh, and Princess Arama, a brave 8-year-old girl who sneaked into the temples to listen to the songs of the priestesses. In a hidden room, guarded by statues of the winged lion, was the inner throne room, where the king received his most trusted advisors. The floor was made of alabaster slabs, and heavy curtains of indigo-dyed cotton hung from the ceiling. There, in solemn silence, King Enshugul listened to the news sent from the eastern borders, where the caravans were beginning to lag. "The merchants from Elam have not arrived for 3 moon cycles," said the great counselor, the old Etanu, bowing before the throne. "Is it wind or treachery?" asked the king, playing with a burnt clay figurine representing a sacred bird. Queen Ninsera looked up slightly. "Or perhaps a warning from the gods." The earth began to tremble slightly near the river, and the waters receded. "The signs are clear." The king looked at the wall covered with murals, where Inanna appeared with her arms raised to the sky. "Then it is time to send a messenger. Who is brave enough to go all the way south, to the end of the river?" That same day, in the palace gardens, a sturdy young man named Sumri, the son of a court gardener, sat on a stone bench, writing on a clay tablet. Hearing rumors of the message to be sent, Sumri dared to ask for an audience. Raised among poets and scribes, but secretly trained by an old reclusive warrior, the boy had a noble heart and an unfulfilled dream of proving his loyalty to Uruk. The queen received him in a room with painted columns, where the scent of cinnamon and myrrh mingled with that of parchments, and in the middle of the room, a refreshing marble basin murmured softly. Ninsara looked at him gently. "You, son of a gardener, do you want to carry the king's word in dangerous lands? I want to show that Uruk is not only stone and gold, but also brave blood in the veins of the humble," Sumri replied, in a confident voice. Impressed by his courage and dignity, the king appointed him a royal envoy who was given a simple cloak of fine wool, with the city's emblem sewn on the chest, a solar disk surrounded by waters. The next day, under the eyes of an entire court, Sumri left through the eastern gate, carrying a message written in cuneiform, sealed with the golden ring of Enshugul. Chapter 2. The Road Beyond the Gates. The next day's dawn brought a heavy silence to the palace of Uruk, as if the very breath of the city had stopped for a moment, awaiting the footsteps that were about to depart. From the high tower of the temple of Inanna, the newly risen sun reflected on the palace's gilded domes and on the ceramic mosaics that shone like fish scales in the morning light on the stone terrace overlooking the southern gardens. Queen Ninsara looked out over the eastern gate. Beside her stood her granddaughter, Ninkala, a 20-year-old girl with jade eyes and the gait of a panther. Raised in the temple and schooled by the city's wise scribes, Ninkala knew the languages of the neighboring cities and the stars that guided the caravans on moonless nights. Her black hair, tied in a long ponytail with linen strings and gold threads, swayed gently in the wind. The queen silently embraced her and placed in her hand a small lapis lazuli talisman, carved with the symbol of the goddess Inanna. "This path is not only one of words, but also of the heart. Carry the peace of Uruk and listen to the echo of other peoples." Ninkala wore a tunic of fine wool dyed a deep blue, tied at the waist with a red belt embroidered with copper threads. Above it was a short cloak of gazelle skin, slightly reinforced at the shoulders and decorated with simple cotton tassels. Shod with sandals with thick soles of hardened leather, she was prepared for sandy and stony terrain. Sumri, in turn, had been equipped with a beige tunic of thick wool, over which he wore a brown leather vest, reinforced with small bronze plates on the chest and shoulders. A wide leather belt held a dagger with a bone handle at his waist. His head was covered by a short camel hair cap, which protected him from the sun, and on his shoulders he had a light linen cloak, which could be the horses of the two had been carefully selected from the royal stables. Alol, Sumri's stallion, was the color of smoke, with dark eyes and a rough mane. Vigorous and hardy, he was known for his patience in long caravans. Ninkala's horse was called Zamatu, a white mare with gray spots and clear, almost green eyes. She was agile and accustomed to the changing terrain, trained by royal guards. Following the two riders came 3 supply carts, drawn by large oxen with broad horns and chestnut fur. The carts were covered with oilcloth and contained sacks of barley, wheat, dried fruits, jars of water, fabrics, and medicinal herbs. Alongside them, 20 soldiers of the royal guard closed the column. The soldiers wore short woolen tunics reddish-brown, reaching to the knees, with edges reinforced with leather. Over them, each wore a bronze chainmail vest, shining in the sun like the scales of a sacred fish. Their heads were covered with hemispherical helmets, decorated with a red feather, and their hands they held long spears with iron tips, and at their waists they had short swords in leather sheaths. Their footwear consisted of heavy traveling sandals, with double leather soles and hemp rope. Reinforcements, suitable for stony roads, on their backs, each carried a short leather knapsack, with fire tools, a lyre, and a small amulet of burnt clay, the symbol of the city of Uruk. Before leaving, at the inner gate of the palace, the high priest of the temple of Inanna recited a short ritual, touching each of the 2 messengers with a palm branch moistened with holy water from the Euphrates. "Go with the goddess' blessing and return in peace and good news." To the eastern gate, the thick walls of burnt brick gleamed in the morning light. Sculptures of a lion and a bull, the protectors of the city, guarded the exit, while drummers beat a slow and solemn rhythm. The people had gathered to see them go, women, children, craftsmen, scribes, merchants, with their faces uplifted and their eyes full of hope. Sumri and Ninkala looked at each other for a moment. They did not know each other well, but the bond that was forming in that moment would be stronger than blood, the bond of the common road. "What is the city at the southern gate?" Sumri asked, in a low voice. "Larsa," Ninkala replied. "The city of the sun, the one that watches over the granaries and underground springs. If anything happens there, all of Mesopotamia will feel the ripples." Sumri nodded gravely. He knew now that the road was not just east, but perhaps south as well, where the missing merchants must be found and the balance of the kingdom preserved. The column set off, the drums beating slower and slower, until silence once again covered the city, and Uruk remained behind, its walls shining in the sun, its temples rising to the gods, and the hearts of those who remained beating in prayer. Chapter 3. Under the Copper Sun. The sun had risen above the horizon like a hot copper plate, casting short, hard shadows over the green fields east of Uruk. The column moved slowly, with a calculated pace, following the route of the old trade route that connected Uruk to Larsa, the city with temples dedicated to the sun god Utu and with wells that reached underground waters. The road was long. 60 miles separated the two cities, a distance that, with a heavy caravan and a cautious step, would take 3 days to cover. All around, the land was flat and wide, but dotted here and there with low sand dunes, the remains of old settlements, and mounds of cracked clay. To the east, the fertile fields gave way to a gently undulating relief, with abandoned irrigation canals, and further on, the horizon became cloudy with dust. Sumri rode a little ahead of the chariots, his spear fastened to his saddle and his eyes constantly moving towards the horizon. Beside him, Ninkala rode straight on her white horse, as if she had been born on Zamatu's back. The silence was broken only by the sound of horseshoes, the creak of wooden wheels, and the occasional giggle of soldiers behind. "You said Larsa had underground wells," Sumri said, looking ahead. "How do you know that?" Ninkala smiled a little, not with disdain, but like a teacher who is glad that a student asks. "The clay tablets in the temple of Enki in Uruk say so. An old scribe copied them after a messenger came with a gift for the high priest. Larsa is built on a layer of porous earth, where water collects. Their wells do not dry up easily, even during droughts." "Have you read the tablets?" "I copied them, translated them, and turned them over in my mind dozens of times," she said. "A city is not just walls and squares. T is what we know about it and how we keep it alive in words." Sumri was silent for a moment. This girl spoke of stone and water as others spoke of gods. "I didn't expect a young woman to know about soils, relief, and springs," he said honestly. "Because too many men imagine that wisdom comes with age. But Uruk has wise women with clear eyes and sure hands. I'm just one of them." Sumri's smile was sincere. "Then I hope I can learn something on this road too." They continued their journey in silence, letting themselves be carried away by their thoughts, wind and dust. Towards afternoon, the sun had become a burden. The tired soldiers had begun to slow down. The guard commander ordered a halt in a low meadow, close to an old canal. The soldiers quickly set up their tents of thick canvas, resistant to wind and sand. They were placed in a semicircle, around a central fire, where the caravan cook was preparing dinner: boiled barley with dried onions, dates, and a lentil stew with small pieces of goat meat. There was a smell of dried spices, probably cumin and a little wild garlic. In a corner, Ninkala had spread out a small rug and was writing something on a fresh clay tablet. Sumri, instead of retreating to his tent intended for the chiefs, he sat on a log beside the soldiers, sharing a bowl of barley with 2 of them, laughing at the boys' simple jokes and asking about their families in Uruk. "Our master does not have the arrogance of nobles," said one of the soldiers. "That is rare." "He was a shepherd's son," another murmured. "Don't forget what it means to have dust between your fingers and thirst in your chest." From the sidelines, Ninkala watched him silently. The firelight reflected in her eyes, and the wind blew through her hair like the strings of a harp. That moment, she understood something. This man, raised in the steppes, had a clear and strong heart. He was not a scholar. But he listened. He was not a priest. But he respected silence. The evening passed quietly. The stars had come out, lighting the sky in dust of light. The fires were slowly fading, and the soldiers were sleeping in tents, 2 by 2, in a corner of the camp. Sumri and Ninkala were sitting on their bags of provisions, sipping tea from a bronze cup. "You talked less today," she said. "I listened to you. And sometimes, that's all you have to do." She smiled. Then, in a low voice, "Thank you for eating with them. That says a lot about a man. Many leaders eat alone and live alone." "Food tastes better when shared," he answered simply. "And good soldiers fight better if they know you're one of them." In the silence that followed, only the wind could be heard passing over the tents and across the dark plain. "Tomorrow we will see the first watchtowers of Larsa," she said. "And perhaps we will find out why the roads between the cities were silent," Sumri added. They fell asleep under the same sky, the earth warm beneath their bodies and their dreams linked, not yet knowing what shadows awaited them. Chapter 4. Footprints in the Sand. Dawn had risen gray over the endless plain, with a faint breeze that cooled the skin, but which announced that the merciless sun would soon rise. The commander of the soldiers, a man with a face furrowed by years and battles, raised Sumri's tent before the light reached the top of the banner. "It's time," he said in a low voice. "The sun will drive us off the road before noon." The soldiers moved quietly, accustomed to the rhythm of the march. They gathered their thick canvas tents, tied their oxhide sandals, girded their short, brick tunics, and checked their bronze weapons, straight spears, short curved swords, and simple bows with full quivers. The carts with supplies were pulled closer, and the horses, nervous, were watered with water drawn from clay pots. Sumri and Ninkala had already emerged from their tent. The young woman had her hair tied back in a fine linen scarf, and over her thin tunic she wore a cloak of wool dyed in indigo blue, held with a copper brooch. Her ankles were protected by soft goatskin boots, and in her hand she held a walking stick, more symbolic rather than defensive. Sumri, on the other hand, was equipped like a soldier. A short tunic with leather plates across the chest, thick sandals, and a wide belt from which hung a sword and a dagger. He had tied his hair in a simple leather bun and was constantly checking his horse. They had not walked more than 2 hours when one of the soldiers in the vanguard came galloping, raising a cloud of dust behind him. "Commander!" he shouted, dismounting from the saddle with rapid breathing. The 2 scouts turned. They found the caravan missing. They all stopped. The soldiers formed a circle, while Ninkala and Sumri advanced towards the commander. "Where?" he asked briefly. "Less than a mile to the southeast. No one is left alive, but there are no clear signs of a fight. Only tracks and collapsed carts." The commander turned to Sumri and the royal girl. "Please stay behind. We will go and investigate and return with news." But Sumri stepped forward, a determination in her eyes that made the soldiers instinctively straighten up. "No, if there is any danger, I want to know it now. I will not be sent to the palace like a child guarded by others. I will go with you." Ninkala, without waiting for any questions, pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders. "I will not stay behind either. I am the queen's niece, and I was sent for a purpose. I will not turn my back on the truth." The commander sighed and nodded. He knew that the will of the 2 was stronger than the command. "Then we move together, but with caution. Archers to keep their eyes open. No one leaves the column." The caravan set off again, but at a slower, tense pace. The ground became increasingly broken and arid, and in the distance the dry branches of wild tamarisks could be seen, a spot of life in the middle of the desert, and then they appeared, overturned carts, loaded with torn sacks of provisions, broken pots, scattered tools of the trade, bronze, cloth, pieces of worked wood. The bodies were not visible, but the tracks of bare feet, dozens, maybe hundreds, led to the edge of a deep pit, obviously dug in haste. Ninkala dismounted and approached a piece of glazed clay. He picked up a broken bracelet and studied it with frowning eyes. "This is not from the merchants of Uruk," she murmured. "Tea is of Elamite manufacture. Someone robbed them, but not with the haste of bandits. Tea was methodical, calculated." Sumri looked at the pits. Then he drew his sword gently. "They were not killed here, but they were taken, or at least some of them. This is a kidnapping, not a massacre." "But who?" one of the soldiers asked. "The terrain is empty, and no city, no fortification, nothing." Ninkala approached one of the carts. On the side wood, traced with a fingernail or a metal tip, was a strange inscription in Akkadian: "Shadows walk through the night. Those who carry the light, let them fear." "This is not a simple band of thieves," she said. "It is something deeper. Warning, message." Sumri inclined her head. She looked at the soldiers and their commander. "Bury what we can recover, take all the supplies, and mark the place. But we will not stop here. If the shadows pass through the night, we will go by day, and we will go together." "You are right," said Ninkala, "but we must be more vigilant. Someone is waiting for us ahead. I do not know who, but it is not a simple man." And the silence that followed, the wind brought a faint smell of smoke from the south. And so, on the second day of the journey, the expedition set off again, with heavier steps, but with more united souls. Sumri rode in the lead, his hand on his sword, and Ninkala, with eyes as sharp as an owl's, searched every trace in the sand, every hollow in the clay, every breeze. Something or someone was watching them from the shadows. Chapter 5. The Whispers of the Night. Evening descended smoothly over the reddish plain, and the shadows stretched like black fingers across the cracked earth. The caravan stopped in a low valley, sheltered by 2 bare hills, where the wind blew less and the sand seemed more settled. The soldiers set up camp with mechanical movements, learned from years of marching. The fires were lit slowly, the horses were tied in a circle, and the tents were being erected in silence. In the middle of the camp a great fire burned, around which sat 4 figures: Sumri, Ninkala, the commander of the troop, and a young soldier with lively eyes and the steps of a cat. The commander was called Belnasir, a man of nearly 50, with sunburned skin and a deep scar that furrowed his right cheek. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice was like stone, heavy, hoarse, and unwavering. "Tomorrow, if the clouds hold, we will reach Larsa before noon," he said. chewing slowly on a piece of dried meat. We will walk along the dry bank of the old canal. T is the most direct route. But also the most exposed, replied Sumeri, turning the wood into embers. If someone is following us, that's not where we want to be. Ninkala, her cloak pulled over her shoulders, watched the flames with a grave expression. I still feel like we're being followed. No animal has approached the camp. No night sound, no owl, no jackal. Just oppressive silence. We have guards on all 4 points, said Belnasir. Each guard has a bow and a full quiver. But you're right, lady. This is not natural silence, it's the silence before a storm. The young soldier in front of them cleared his throat. Commander, with your permission. Belnasir looked at him with a raised eyebrow. Speak, shooter. I would like to go on a reconnaissance. I will take Targil with me. He has good eyes in the dark. We will walk, without torches, for an hour to the southeast. Let's see if there are any tracks, fires, movement. Then we will return before sunrise. The commander looked at him for a long time. You know we are not on a regular mission. If you encounter anything, do not intervene. I do not want to lose men for nothing. I understand, sir. We just want to know what awaits us. Targil agrees. Yes, sir. He was on the edge of the Elamite border. He knows the signs. We can both go in silence. Without armor, without horses. Sumeri intervened. If I go, I want to know what you are looking for. Tracks? Fires? Sounds? Shooter answered simply. Smell of smoke, turned stones, footsteps in the sand, traces of bare or soft-skinned feet, and strange tablets or markings. Like yesterday, Belnasir looked at Sumeri, then at Ninkala, who nodded. Okay, go. But you have 4 hours. If you don't return in time, I'll send men after you. Shooter stood up, pulled his hood over his head, and left without another word. Soon, Targil joined him from the shadows, and they both disappeared into the night, swallowed by the darkness that danced around the fire. After silence fell again, Sumeri reached for a steaming ceramic mug of mint and cumin tea. They are brave, or crazy. Ninkala smiled weakly. Sometimes, it takes a little of both. Commander Belnasir rested his elbows on his knees and stared into the fire. Let's hope the darkness is not wiser than we are. Because if it is, tomorrow morning we will find out how unprepared we are. The fire crackled once, and sparks rose into the starry sky. Silence fell over the camp again, like a heavy blanket, and somewhere in the darkness, the footsteps of Shooter and Targil continued on into the unknown. Chapter 6. Shadows that Walk Before Dawn. The ground was cold beneath their feet, and the wind blew softly, hissing through the hills like a forgotten sigh. Shooter and Targil advanced in silence, covered in thick, dust-stained cloaks to blend into the landscape. Each step was calculated, each stone carefully avoided, each dry leaf avoided with a skill born of years of training. Shortly after they left the camp, they left behind the sound of fires and the murmur of soldiers. The sky above them was full of stars, but the moon had only just risen, offering them only a weak, diffuse light. What do you feel? Targil asked in a whisper. The silence is wrong, too dense. Either something is hiding, or something is watching us, Shooter said, stopping and bending down to examine the ground. In the weak light, he noticed tracks. They were not of animals. They were not even of sandals like soldiers. They were wide tracks, with a split tip, like hooves, but they did not resemble those of any known animal. The tracks ran parallel to the main road and stopped abruptly near a low rock. Targil approached and placed his palm on the cold stone. Then he sighed. It is warm. Someone was here a short time ago. Shooter swallowed hard and surveyed the surroundings. His gaze fell on a broken branch, caught in a bush. Slowly, he pulled it away and felt something smooth under his fingers, an oval object of burnt clay, with engraved signs. A tablet, Targil whispered. Yes, and it's written in cuneiform from the old Akkadian dialect, but it's recent. The ink still smells. Who writes them like that anymore? Those who don't want to be understood by most or by those who come from Uruk. Shooter wrapped the tablet in the inner fabric of his cloak and signaled to Targil it was time to return. The wind had changed. From the south, a sour smell came, mixed with ash. Someone had lit a fire not far away. The way back was quieter and colder. When they reached the camp, the sky was beginning to take on bluish hues. Belnasir was waiting for them in front of the tent, his arms crossed. Sumeri and Ninkala were also there, awakened by the agitated rustling of the guards. Say, the commander said, without greeting them. Shooter took out the tablet and handed it to Sumeri, who took it carefully, almost religiously. We found tracks, not of men, not of horses. Large, open steps, perhaps made by something with hooves, but it doesn't look like anything known. Targil found a warm rock. There was a fire there an hour ago, maybe less. And the tablet? Ninkala asked, raising an eyebrow. Sumri was already reading. It's a warning dot or a message left intentionally. Those who step at dawn without a blessing will awaken the old ashes. Turn back, it is signed, with an unknown symbol, a double spiral surrounded by lines. It is not Mesopotamian style, it is older. Old? What do you mean older? Asked Targil, leaning on his spear. From before Uruk. The symbols also appear in the underground temples of Akkad. They were signs of lost cults, of those who worshipped shadows. A shiver passed through everyone present. Even Belnasir seemed to be digging his feet deeper into the sand. Shall we continue our journey? Asked Targil. Yes, answered Sumri, closing the tablet in a leather bag. Even more cautiously. Ninkala looked at them both. You did the right thing. You saved us time, and maybe lives. Belnasir motioned for them to rest, and the tents quivered again, life returning to the camp. In less than an hour, the caravan was moving. But now, everyone was walking closer to each other. Weapons were at hand. Eyes always searching, and the shadows seemed longer than the day before. Chapter 7. Fire and Sand. The sun had barely risen 3 spears into the sky when the caravan left the sheltering valley and set off south. The air was already getting hot, and the sand seemed to tremble in the distance. The horses and camels walked at a leisurely pace, and the 5 carts full of provisions creaked on their heavy wooden wheels. Sumri rode beside Ninkala, exchanging impressions about the symbols on the tablet, while Commander Belnasir kept the formation tight. The soldiers in 2 columns, 10 each, with spears, held obliquely and shields at their backs. Targil, careful as a panther, walked ahead with 2 scouts, but there was no need to go too far. Not a mile after they had set off, a hoarse cry cut through the air. Camels! From the east! They are coming fast! Targil turned in his saddle and raised his arm, his eyes blazing with rage. It's the Eastern Hawks! I recognized them by their flags, the black stars on the red. And that one in front is Karzub, their leader. In less than an instant, dozens of camels charged over the dunes, carrying men armed with curved swords and long spears. Their faces were covered with dark scarves, and their eyes shone with hatred and greed. Their cries, loud and unbridled, mingled with the sounds of hooves and the roar of the wind. Defensive formation! Belnasir shouted. The soldiers moved quickly, drawing the carts into a tight circle and using them as a barricade. Their short bronze swords sparkled in the light, and their spears were already lowered into attack position. The first wave of attackers clashed with shields and spears, but a few managed to leap over the carts, swords raised. The blows echoed in the air, shields shattered, horses whinnied, and cries of pain could be heard in all directions. Sumri drew his long, double-edged dagger from its sheath, and in one motion, he cut the bridle of a camel, knocking the rider to the ground. He rushed at him and, with a precise movement, immobilized him. The prisoner was young, but his eyes were dark and cunning. He struggled with all his might, but Sumri put the dagger to his throat. You only live if you keep quiet, he whispered. Oh, the north of the camp. 2 soldiers captured 2 other attackers, after they had wounded them in the legs. The prisoners were screaming in unknown languages, but they had been disarmed and bound with thick hemp ropes. Still, the losses had not been light. 4 soldiers lay in the sand, their blood staining the ground and their armor red. Ninkala dismounted and knelt beside one of them, placing her hand on his chest. He was already dead. May the jinn be easy on them, she whispered. Karzub, the leader of the thieves, shouted from the distance, after losing almost a third of his men. We will return. Your gold will be ours. No one escapes the hawks of the east. And, suddenly pulling his camel, he disappeared into the distance with those who remained, leaving behind dust, blood and silence broken only by the groans of the wounded. The caravan was put back in order, but the silence was heavy. Wounds and death hung in the air, and the soldiers, although victorious, kept their heads bowed. Belnasir, with a broken sword at his belt, turned to the Sumri. 3 prisoners. Maybe we will find out what they are planning. But we have lost 4 good men, and 3 more are seriously injured. Ninkala approached the Sumri. Her eyes were clear, but strong. You were brave. You saved lives. But they were good too. Let us not forget them. We will not forget them, Sumri said. Nor Karzub. We will search for him, or he will search for us again. Behind them, the caravan began to move again, with fewer steps, but with double determination. They knew now that their mission was more dangerous than a journey. T was a step in a game of shadows, in which not only thieves were following the caravan, but also something older, deeper, and the night would come again. Chapter 8. The Hidden Language and the Truth Unveiled. The midday heat was overwhelming, and the caravan had stopped in a small natural shelter, where sparse trees and white rocks offered a minimum of shade. The air vibrated with the silence of the desert, broken only by the sighing of animals and the clank of metal as soldiers cleaned their weapons. Sumri stood leaning against a boulder, his dark eyes watching the three prisoners who had been tied to a thick trunk. One had a face full of congealed blood, another remained silent as a statue, but the third figure, dressed in a loose tunic, seemed to tremble. "It is a girl," Targil said, almost whispering. She pretended to be a man. She was among those who jumped from behind. Sumri approached. Commander Belnasir came to his side. "I have already asked them." They were silent as stones. Not a word about the camp or the leader. "Let me try," said Nikala, who had just dismounted. She had removed her thin veil from her head and gathered her hair into a braid. Her eyes were sharp, firm, but compassionate. She approached the prisoners, knelt before the girl and spoke, slowly, in a language rarely heard on the Sumerian plains. "Ima Aram, Lug Alam Balatu? Who are you? Does your king live?" The girl started. Her gaze darkened. She had not expected someone to speak to her in the eastern dialect of the semi-nomadic tribes of the Zagros Mountains. Nikala smiled slightly and continued, moving gracefully from one language to another, Akkadian, Gutian, and even a few Elamite expressions. The girl sighed. Then, in a low voice, she answered, more with fear than courage. "I am Laritu, from the Alumru tribe." Nikala bowed her head. She had heard of this tribe, migrants, skilled in fighting and camel racing. But they were not known for bandit attacks. What was Laritu looking for among the eastern falcons? "Why did you come? Why did you attack us?" "Karzab bought us and others. He promised us gold and revenge. He said the Sumerians were coming with treasures, that they would destroy the sacred springs of the south." "And the camp? Where is it?" The girl looked at the other two prisoners, who were staring at her sharply, but she didn't dare interrupt. Laritu sighed again. There was sand on her face and dried blood at the corner of her lip, but her voice was clear. "In the low mountains to the east, on the edge of the arid Maru Valley. 2 days walk for a camel, 3 for a man. There are at least 50 there, and they await further orders." Nikala stood up and turned back to Sumri. "She is telling the truth. She was tricked. She is young, but wise. She has been trained to lie, but something in her does not want to continue on this path." "Did she tell us where the camp is?" Belnasir asked in a cautious tone. "Yes, and the name of her tribe. They are only involved because they were bought. Maybe we can turn some of them against Karzab." Sumri approached the prisoner and looked her in the eye. Despite her recent past, he saw no malice, only a mixture of shame and desire to escape. "Laritu, you did well to speak up. Perhaps you will not remain a prisoner for long." The girl bowed her head, but said nothing. Her gaze fell on Nikala, as if silently thanking him for the fact that she had been treated like a human, not prey. The sun was sinking towards the edge of the sky, and the caravan was preparing to set off again. The soldiers were reforming their formation, but the tension remained. They knew now that they had not been attacked at random. It was part of a plan. Sumri climbed into the saddle, next to Nikala. "You have the gift of words," he told her. "Tea is more dangerous than a sword." Nikala smiled, simply. "A sword cuts once, but the word can open or destroy entire cities." And the caravan set off again, southward, towards Larsa, but even deeper into the mysteries and darkness of the desert. Chapter 9. The Closed Gates of Larsa. The sun was slowly setting over the dry plain, where the shadows of soldiers and supply wagons stretched long like spears on the golden sand. After 3 days of marching in the heat and through uncertain lands, in the distance they could see the huge towers and walls of the city of Larsa, the city of the Sun Temple and bastion of knowledge in the south. But when they approached the city gates, they were closed. A guard, armed with a long spear, stood high on the walls, one hand raised. "Stop! Who comes to the gates of Larsa at sunset?" Commander Belnasir made a sign, and the caravan stopped in a cloud of dust. Sumri rode forward, Nikala at his side, both of them visible in their royal robes. "We are sent from Uruk, in the name of King Inshugal and Queen Ninsera. We come with news, but also with warnings," Sumri said bluntly. "Evidence?" the guard shouted. Sumri held out an official parchment, sealed with the emblem of the royal house of Uruk, a burnt clay seal engraved with the image of the goddess Inanna and the sacred inscription of the queen. A young soldier from Larsa hurried down and, after checking the seal, got lost between the towers. The wait was hard. More than half an hour passed, and the soldiers looked at each other nervously. The horses hooted, and Laritu, tied to a chariot, looked at the walls with a mixture of fear and fascination. Inanna seemed calm, but her eyes analyzed every movement on the ramparts. Finally, the thick wooden gates creaked open with a heavy creak, letting in the yellow light of torches and a troop of Larsian guards, in golden breastplates and helmets decorated with solar symbols. At their head was a tall man with a neat beard and long dark blue cloak. He looked like a high-ranking scribe, but he had an authoritative attitude. "I am Namalzu, chief scribe and gatekeeper. I have received the sign of your king. You are permitted entry. You are guests of Larsa." "Thank you, Namalzu. We have much to say and offer," Inanna said. "Tomorrow. Rest tonight. Your people will be accommodated in the guest village, near the large market. Horses and supplies will be taken to the southern inn." The caravan set off again, but this time through the gates of Larsa. The city was a scent of incense, stone dust, and licorice smoke. The streets were paved with smooth tiles, and the walls of the houses seemed high and solid, decorated with colorful ceramic tiles. Above them all, in the distance, rose the ziggurat of the sun, the temple dedicated to Utu, the god of light. Inanna looked around, fascinated. The buildings had carved wooden balconies, and here and there were fountains where women dressed in flowing robes washed bronze vessels. As the convoy moved forward, the locals emerged from their homes and watched the caravan, the soldiers, and the prisoners with interest. A small child waved to Sumeri, and he smiled at him. When they finally reached the guest quarters, the area was already lit with large torches. The soldiers from Larsa helped them set up. Tents had been pitched in a guarded courtyard, and Inanna, Sumeri, and Belnasir were led to a guest house, a simple but clean building with low mattresses, embroidered pillows, and jars of scented water. Evening fell quietly. After a warm dinner of lentils, mutton, and dates with honey, Sumeri went out into the courtyard and sat down on a stone bench. Inanna sat down next to him, wrapped in a thin woolen cloak. "You were impressive today. Without you, we might not have entered the city. Sometimes it's not force that opens the gates, it's trust," she said with a brief smile. "Tomorrow we must convince the leadership of Larsa to collaborate. Let's tell them about Karzab and the danger that comes from the wastelands." "And about Laritu," Inanna completed. Then, more quietly, "Did you see how the people looked at us? The world is restless. I know something is coming. Yes, tonight is just the lull before the storm." And in that silence, far from the city walls, in the desert mist, Karzab was already planning his next move. Chapter 10. In the Hall of 5 Pillars. The sun had barely risen over the rooftops of Larsa when a messenger from the palace summoned Sumeri, Inanna, and Commander Belnasir to their long-awaited meeting with the city's leaders. The streets were still quiet, and merchants were gradually opening their shops. Sacred chants could be heard from the temple towers, and small bells tinkled with every breath of wind. The road to the Hall of 5 Pillars, the decision-making heart of the city, was paved with yellow stone slabs, and the walls were painted with scenes of harvests, offerings to the god Utu, and ancient sages holding clay tablets in their hands. Once there, the three were led by 2 officials to a vast room, where 5 huge alabaster columns supported the vaulted ceiling, decorated with solar paintings. On a high platform sat the 4 rulers of the city, and in their midst, slightly withdrawn but clearly the most powerful, was Governor Mardakahi, an elderly man with dark skin and clear eyes, dressed in a white robe with gold thread. In his right hand he held a short cedar scepter, the sign of authority. Next to him were Siritu, the high priest of the temple of Utu; Nanumetal, the leader of the merchants and representative of the eastern quarter; Asherah, an imposing woman, the leader of the city guard; Etalu, the scribe judge, the one who spoke and wrote down every word. The governor spoke first, his voice calm but strong. "Welcome to Larsa, envoys of Uruk. We owe you hospitality, but we also want answers. Why does an armed caravan come, with prisoners and rumors of attacks, on the eve of the fire festival?" Sumeri stepped forward. He wore the official robe of a royal messenger and a ring with the signet of Inshugal. "We come with respect and warning. In a way, we were attacked by an organized gang known as the Hawks of the East, led by a man named Karzab. They had precise information about our route. They killed 4 of our men. We captured 3 of them. One revealed to us that they have a camp in the arid Mara Valley. This is no simple band of robbers. They are organized, trained, and well-informed." Siritu, the high priest, frowned. "Karzab, I have heard this name in prayers. He was once a scribe in Gersu. Exiled for blasphemy, T was said that he brought false dreams to people and spoke of a black light. Inanna stepped forward and spoke gracefully. Among the prisoners is a girl, Laritu, who betrayed Karzub's camp. She told us that their leader wants to destabilize the cities of the south, to cause chaos between temples and governors. He gathers forgotten tribes, nomads, and deserting soldiers. If we do not unite, it will be too late. Asherah, the leader of the city guard, slammed her hand on the bronze table in front of her. And what do you ask of Larsa? An alliance. Troops. Supplies. Bel-Nasir stepped alongside Inanna. We ask for a temporary coalition. Let us set out together on a reconnaissance mission into the arid Mara Valley. Let us capture Karzub and destroy his base. If he succeeds in spreading fear among the cities, it will be the end of the balance in the south. Edalu was already writing each word on the tablet, with quick and precise movements. Governor Mardakahi closed his eyes for a moment. Silence fell in the great hall. Then he spoke. Those who come with wisdom must be listened to, and those who come with blood on their hands must be judged. I will send 3 of our captains to analyze the camp. If what you say is true, Larsa will answer. Inanna bowed her head in gratitude. Thank you, master. May the sun illuminate the steps of each of us. The governor smiled slightly. The sun illuminates, but it also burns. Just as this alliance could burn, if it is not built on truth. And with these words, the meeting ended. Summary, Inanna and Bel-Nasir had been heard. But the War of the Shadows was only beginning. Chapter 11. The Shadow and the Road. The Hall of 5 Pillars was plunged into semi-darkness as the Council of Larsa gathered again, this time for a decision that could change the balance of entire southern Mesopotamia. In the middle of the hall, guarded by 2 soldiers, stood Laritu, the young woman captured from the ranks of the Eastern Falcons. Her green eyes, wide and restless, looked now at Inanna, now at Sumer. Her hair was tied in a simple braid, and her clothes, clean but modest, were provided by the palace servants. In her hands trembled a vessel of water that she held respectfully, as if an offering to fate. Governor Mardakahi rose from his carved wooden chair and spoke clearly. Laritu, you have chosen to betray the camp of Karzub, the leader of the Eastern Falcons. If you lie, your life will end in the dungeons beneath the city. If you tell the truth, you have a chance to be forgiven and even become an ally of the cities. Now, in front of the witnesses and the scribe, do you undertake to lead a mission to the camp of those who raised you? Laritu straightened his back. He spoke in a clear voice, but barely restrained by fear. Yes, I swear by the goddess Ishtar and the hot desert earth, I will take you to the camp. But you will not go with many. If they sense us in time, they will hide or kill us mercilessly. Sumri intervened. We will go only with the chosen ones, me, Inanna, Bel-Nasir, and you. 4 is all we can risk. We will leave the rest waiting, and if we do not return in 2 days, an assault force will be launched. That afternoon, the 4 prepared to leave. Inanna wore a long sand-colored tunic of coarse linen, fastened with a leather belt. Over it, a hooded cloak protected her from the desert wind. Sumri, as usual, wore a light coat of fine mail over a thin woolen shirt, and at his waist he carried a short sword and a curved dagger. Bel-Nasir was clad in steel and leather, and his helmet had an inscription on the side with the symbol of the city of Uruk. Laritu, in the clothes Inanna had provided, seemed an ordinary traveler. But in her eyes remained that spark of knowledge of the danger that lay ahead. Each had his own horse, the red stallion, and Inanna's horse was called Zamatu, a white mare with gray spots and clear, almost green eyes. Swift, black-haired animals bred for arid terrain. Bel-Nasir rode a heavy horse with light armor, and Laritu had been entrusted with a tame but resilient mare. They set off at sunset, silent and with heavy thoughts. Laritu walked ahead, his gaze fixed, avoiding eye contact for too long. The terrain was increasingly arid, dotted with reddish rocks, dusty plateaus, and sparse bushes of grass. On the horizon was a narrow valley flanked by 2 bare hills, Arid Maru. As the girl called it and the evening, they lit a small fire, hidden from view. They sat close to each other, under an improvised shelter between 2 huge boulders. How far is the camp? Asked Bel-Nasir. Tomorrow evening we will arrive nearby, replied Laritu. It is hidden among the rocks, in the lowest part of the valley. From there, I send spies in all directions. Karzub has people in Larsa, in Ur, and maybe even in Uruk. Inanna frowned. What does he really want? Just looting? No, replied Laritu, whispering. He wants to destroy the order of the cities. Says the gods have given him a mission, to burn the temples, to break the chain between the rulers and the people. He says he is the one born of the ash wind. Sumri was left thinking. Then we are not fighting just a gang, but a cult. One born of chaos. The fire crackled softly. Above, the stars burned coldly. "If we get close to the camp," said Belnasir, "what sign will prove that we are not enemies?" Leritu took from his cloak a piece of red cloth, with an embroidered sign, an open circle with a broken line in the middle. "This is the symbol of the shadow of Karzib. If I see it, I will not shoot immediately. But I cannot guarantee anything. Many believe me a traitor and will not forgive me." Inanna reached out and touched her arm lightly. "If you do not betray us, you are free." Leritu looked at her for the first time. Truly, shadow of gratitude appeared in her eyes. "We will go to the end," she said. Sumri pulled the cloak over her shoulders and said, looking up at the sky, "Tomorrow we will see the truth. Each step brings us closer not only to Karzib, but to who we truly are." And so, under the stars above the desert, the four waited for dawn. Silent, determined. Chapter 12. In the Heart of Shadow. On the second evening, as the wind came down coldly from the bare hills, the four of them stopped on a low hill, covered with fine gravel and sparse bushes. From there, the hidden valley of arid Maru could be clearly seen, a deserted and silent place, but in its heart burned the moving light of campfires. Under the moon, the shadows of large goatskin tents could be seen, spread out in an irregular circle, hidden between the rocks. Armed men patrolled the edges. The smell of smoke and burning flesh hung in the air, and in the center of the circle, a black tent with golden edges dominated the entire camp, Karzib's tent. "There he is," whispered Leritu, pointing to the large tent. "He sleeps with minimal security, because he believes himself invincible. Tonight he is alone, confident that no one would dare to approach." "If we approach now, there will be eyes everywhere," Belnasir said, peering through the short bronze scope. "We wait for the fires to die down, when the guards are tired." Inanna checked the dagger hidden in the sleeve of his tunic. Sumri, calmly, prepared his short sword and a thick leather rope. The plan was clear. Leritu would sneak in first, enter the tent as if he had returned to Karzib for good. If he managed to put him to sleep or keep him quiet, the other three would have a few moments to enter quietly, strike him, and take him prisoner. If the plan failed, the entire camp could turn on them. The silence of the night was broken only by the occasional whistle of the wind among the stones. When the sky was already completely dark and only a few torches still illuminated the camp, Leritu pulled up his hood and she set off alone among the shadows. She walked like a ghost, with measured steps, without hesitation. No guard stopped her. They recognized her, although with surprise. Maybe they thought she had returned. Maybe they thought it was a vision. No one had the courage to ask her anything. Arriving at the tent, she pushed aside the heavy canvas and entered. Karzib was fast asleep on a thick mattress, covered with a black wool blanket. At the end of the bed lay his sword and an empty bowl of wine. His face was stern, bearded, but tired, dreaming, perhaps, of empires in flames. Leritu paused for a moment. Her eyes were trembling. She had been part of his dream. She had been one of the shadow children. But now she knew that dream was a disease. She raised her hand slightly and, with a short movement, pulled a string tied to her wrist. That was the signal. In a few moments, the canvas of the tent moved slightly, and Inanna, Sumri, and Belnasir stepped inside like shadows. "Now," Inanna whispered. Sumri went first. With a short, hard wooden stick, he gave Karzib a quick blow to the temple. Belnasir held his body down, so that he would not writhe. Karzib groaned, but he did not have time to cry out. Inanna bound his mouth and hands with a rope brought from Larsa. The whole thing took less than a minute. "Cover him!" They wrapped him in a thick blanket, with the hood pulled over his face. They mounted Belnasir's horse, and Leritu took the reins. Each of them pulled his cloak up to his eyes, and in the silence of the night, they set off at a leisurely pace, as if they were on patrol. But they had not gone 100 paces when a guard spotted something strange. A shout was heard. "Wait! Who is there?" Sumri drew his sword and threw it in the direction of the voice. Short scream, then silence. But it was too late. The alarms had been raised. 3, 4, then 8 men came out with torches and spears. "Run!" Belnasir shouted, and his horse took off like lightning, with Karzib tied to it. Inanna drew a bow and felled a pursuer. Leritu cut a stretched rope with his dagger, knocking a burning torch over a tent and creating confusion as the horse sped. Sumri managed to throw a bag of ashes and sand into the air, an old trick of blinding. The pursuers were temporarily blinded, and in those few precious moments, the group escaped from between the tents and soared into the valley. They fled with the wind at their backs and the shadow warriors behind. But Belnasir's horse was the fastest. Karzib, unconscious and tied, could not move. The others scattered to confuse the pursuers, but they met again an hour later, at the stable site, a dry stream pit at the edge of a plateau. "He's alive," Inanna said, looking at the prisoner. He was breathing hard, But he was alive. "We have 1 day to get him back," Belnasir said, "before the thieves gather." "And if he escapes?" Laritu asked, trembling. Sumri leaned toward her. "He won't. Not with you by our side." With the ruddy dawn behind them and a prisoner shrouded in shadows, the four galloped toward Larsa, carrying with them not just a man, but the key to a budding uprising. Chapter 13. The Truth Brought in Chains. Dawn was slowly breaking over the towers of Larsa, and the long shadows of the walls stretched across the dusty roads. The great gates to the north were already open when the 4 horsemen appeared on the horizon, accompanied by a 5th horseman, bound tightly and covered with a thick cloak, Karzub, brought alive from the heart of the shadows. The guards at the gate froze as they recognized the Sumri and Nikala. One of them ran to Mardakahi, the governor of the city, who was already waiting for them. In the Hall of 5 Pillars, along with members of the council and the royal scribe and the palace courtyard, Karzub was dismounted and dragged under the silent gaze of the counselors and priests. He was conscious now, but his eyes, deep and red, looked with contempt at everything around him. "Traitors of the gods, slaves of your weak walls," he muttered between his teeth. When Sumri pushed him to his knees in the middle of the hall, Mardakahi advanced, accompanied by 2 scribes, and raised the staff of judgment, carved with a snake's head at the top. "Karzub, you have been brought alive to the citadel to answer before the council. You have waged secret war against cities, burned caravans, poisoned springs, and incited rebellion. Oh, you have anything to say?" Karzub looked up. He was smiling, a cold, stony smile. "You call war what I call liberation. The true gods do not live in your temples. They rise from the ashes and demand fire. I only follow their command." Murmur ran through the hall. Some counselors frowned, others made the sacred sign on their chests. "Have you received gold from our enemies in the east?" Nikala asked. "Gold is just a stepping stone to a dream. Whoever sent me recognized my power. But he didn't pay me. I am not sold. I am the herald of your doom." Laritu, in a corner, trembled. His voice pierced her bones, bringing back dark memories. "How many people are in your camp?" Belnasir asked. "How many are about to set off for Larsa?" Karzub laughed. "There is no longer just one camp. It is a chained river underground. Thousands, maybe tens of thousands. And they are not coming just to Larsa. They are coming to all your fat and flabby cities." Sumri leaned towards him. "And who is the shadow above? Who do you worship?" Karzub was silent for a moment. Then he spoke a single name. Ashazar. A shiver ran through the hall. The name was unknown in the temples, but it was present in ancient writings, fragments of clay tablets found in the ruins of Adab. Ashazar, a cursed god, outlawed hundreds of years ago, associated with fire, chaos, and the overturning of the chain of the world. Mardakahi rapped his staff on the floor 3 times. "Enough. He will be locked in the southern tower, under double guard. He will be examined by the wise men of the temples and guarded day and night. And in 7 days, the council will meet to decide his fate." Karzub was dragged outside, and already in the halls anxious voices began to gather. The word Ashazar was passed from mouth to mouth. That evening, Sumri, Nikala, Belnasir, and Laritu were invited to a small meeting with Mardakahi and the palace scribe. "You have saved the city," said the governor. "But you have also brought a shadow deeper than any known war. If he speaks the truth, then the cities will fall one by one, without us knowing where the blow comes from." Sumri took a sip from his water bowl and said, "It is time to stop looking outside. It is time to look within." Who spoke to Karzub? Who helped him? Who called him? Nikala added, "We need a network of messengers, people who can walk among the shadows and bring news." Laritu led us to him. "But she is not alone." Mardakahi stood and nodded. "You will lead this new initiative. Laritu, if you choose, you can stay here, under my protection, or you can leave. But if you choose to stay, you become a citizen of Larsa." Laritu, silent, her hands clasped in her lap, looked at Nikala, then at Sumri. "I will stay, but not as a citizen, but as a witness, and as a messenger among the shadows." That evening was the beginning of a new page in the history of Larsa. Karzub was captured, but the war was just beginning. Chapter 14. The Soil in the Dark and the Name That Never Dies. Night had fallen upon Larsa with an unnatural weight. The wind carried with it a smell of ash, wet clay, and burnt wood, as if the gods had momentarily left the realm of men. The temple of Utu, the sun god, stood brightly lit by torches, but that night even the flames dared not dance too loudly. In a low, vaulted room hidden deep within the temple, Siritu, the high priest, kneaded his hands on an alabaster table. Beside him stood Asherah, the commander of the city guard, a broad-shouldered woman with iron eyes, and a voice that could quell an uprising with a single word. "Asherah," he said, his voice hoarse, "you are in charge of the dungeons beneath the city. Is that robber still down there? The one who was brought in chains 7 months ago?" "Yes, Most High," answered Asherah, "he is alive. Fed on water and scraps of bread, he curses in his sleep and spits blood, but he does not die. At the trial he said he saw him, a shazer." Asherah rested her hand on the hilt of her sword. "All those who have lost their minds talk about shadows. But if he is telling the truth, then perhaps Larsa is already betrayed." Sirita nodded and rose heavily from her chair. "Asherah, you are a woman of steel, but no sword can cut the shadows. If that cursed one has returned, then even the bronze gates will not save us." Shortly after midnight, the southern gate was shaken by 3 sharp knocks. Small patrol was on guard, but when they opened, there was neither man nor cart outside. Only a man dressed in a gray cloak, his face covered by a mask of burnt wood. He did not seem to breathe, he did not make a sound. But in his right hand he held a seal point. One of the soldiers, frightened, ran towards the palace. When Sumeri and Nikala were urgently called, the mysterious messenger had already been escorted to the council hall, where Mardakahi, the governor, was waiting for him surrounded by priests and scribes. "Who are you, and from what depth do you come?" Mardakahi asked. The stranger dropped his mask. Beneath it, his skin was glued to his bones, with deep-set eyes the color of pitch. He was not alive, but he was not dead either. Something else felt inside that body. Something old, something broken. "I am the voice of a shazer, the hidden in time," he answered in a throaty voice, like crushed stone. He does not ask, he commands. A tremor ran through the room. Nikala took a step forward. "A shazer is a myth, a name used to frighten children." "No," said the messenger, "he was the high priest of the city of Kesh. Until he dared to bring life to dead bodies, he was burned. His body was wrapped in sheets of lead and buried under the sand. But a part of him never died, and the curse woke him when your temples began to fall silent." Sumeri motioned for the soldiers to approach. "And what do you want?" "He demands the release of caravans.By the third rising of U2. Otherwise, Larsa will fall." "What proof do we have that you speak on his behalf?" Mardakahi asked. The soul pulled aside his cloak and took from a small bag an object wrapped in old leather. He slowly opened it, and everyone in the hall froze. T was a clay tablet, covered with an unknown cuneiform script, blood-red in color. When Siratu approached, he was visibly trembling. This is the ancient script of Kesh. No one knows how to use it anymore." Only 3 symbols were written on the tablet. The last was an image of a sun covered by a circle of darkness. The eclipse of souls, as it had been called in the old legends. The soul fell silent. Then he turned without another word and went out, disappearing into the night. As silently as he had come, T-dawn, Asherah descended into the dungeons of the deep. There, in the darkness and mold, the robber Siratu had spoken of stood bound, dirty, with a scruffy beard and an old wound on his ankle. But when he saw her, he smiled. "He came, didn't he? I knew he would come." "Who?" "A shazer. Don't name him. He was with me in my dream, looked at me and showed me burning cities. People were hanging from the towers. Then he said to me, 'It's almost time.'" Asherah approached. "What did he look like?" "He has no face, just a black veil, but the voice is like a knife in flesh, and where he treads, the earth no longer sprouts." Asherah left without a word, with only one conclusion in mind. This threat was not a human one. That day, the council met in haste. Sumeri, Nikala, and Mardakahi decided. "Karzub will not be released. But we must prepare." "Send messengers to Uruk and Eridu," Sirita said. "Ask for help. This is not a war of Larsa alone. T is the beginning of a different end." And Nikala, with his hand on the dagger, said, "If a shazer lives, then he will learn what it means to face men who fear neither gods nor shadows."